So as Margie said, we split the talk into two pieces. I'm going to give an overview of the project, what it took to put in place, what we put in place, and then we'll hand it over to Rebecca, who's going to give you an overview of all the wonderful features that came about as a result. So a little bit of background to sort of describe what we did and why we did it, the AIP strategy. Like a lot of things, this kind of started with a management restructure at AIP, an upper management restructure. And they took a look at everything that we were doing at the time, what we were at the company, as a company. And what we were essentially was not only a publisher, but a service provider. So in addition to all of our suite of physics journals, we also provided services for peer review, composition, and online hosting. By now, hopefully you know that our online hosting site was branded Citation, and that was developed internally back in the mid to late 90s and served us well over many years. So management came in and took a look at what we were doing and decided that we were spending a lot of time and energy on our services part of the business, and the journals piece was starting to suffer a little. So they started to rethink whether we were going to be in that business. At the same time, they started looking at all of our internal technologies to try to make sure that we were current with future trends. And part of that was looking at classification schemes and trying to determine whether what we were using would really serve us well into the future. So this all led us to decide to do a citation migration, basically to stop hosting Citation internally and to go to an external service provider. What we wanted to do is make sure that the new platform was going to be based on semantic technologies, JATS XML, and ultimately we selected publishing technology and their pub2web platform. It's worth noting that there's a lot of reasons that you decide to go to a certain platform provider. And one of the major reasons, certainly not the only one, was that the publishing technology pub2web platform is based on an RDF triple store. And I think Rebecca's going to go into that in a little more detail. So again, a platform migration has a lot of components, whether it be site design, URL structures, fulfillment integration, but I'm going to focus on these four components: the development of our thesaurus, the conversion of our content, the semantic enrichment of that content, and then of course the workflows, what we needed to do to glue all this stuff together to make it happen. So the story kind of starts with our PACS classification scheme, which has been published by AIP between the years of 1970 and 2010. It was a hierarchical scheme that served us well for many years. You can see the stats: 10 broad subject categories, about 5,000 terms. And what a PACS term was this code along with the term. The code had, the parts of the code had some meaning, including that little plus sign. And the terms basically were sentences, which may have really included multiple terms. And I love this example because that little parenthetical expression in there is actually part of the term. So it's almost like a comment as part of the PACS term. Now, PACS served us very well for many years. It was basically put in place originally back in 1970 so that we could create annual subject indexes and author indexes. Back in the day, of course, there was no Google, so if you wanted to find content, how were you going to do it? Well, by publishing a subject index every year, researchers could go through that and find the articles that they were interested in from the previous year. And in fact, sometimes we had 5-year indexes as well. Once we developed an online platform, it could be used for topical browsing, which it was, and PACS-based search. And I imagine back in the mid to late 90s, those PACS codes maybe were known by certain researchers, and that might be a good way to search. But certainly going forward, that's been well supplanted by Google and natural language search. So we decided to move forward with the Thesaurus to replace our PACS. So to develop the Thesaurus, we needed to derive the terms, and obviously since we had a classification scheme, we started with our PACS terms. We downloaded a bunch of search request logs so that we could see what the users were actually searching for, which maybe weren't included in PACS. And then of course we had an SME review of the terms to develop them. We started with a hierarchy based on PACS, and what we ended up with was a thesaurus of over 6,000 preferred terms, over 6,000 synonyms, 21 top terms, so we actually increased the hierarchy a little bit, and just about 2,000 terms with related terms. We ended up with over 14,000 conditional rules and 1,300 conditional rules as well. So last week I decided just for fun to throw that PACS term through the MAI processor, and what I ended up with was from that PACS term stellar systems, interstellar medium, and extragalactic astronomy as terms. So probably no surprise to anybody in this room, 2 of those terms are actually from the PAX term. One was basically generated through the vagaries of MAI, whether it be related terms, TTM, or whatever. So the timeline of this, we actually started way back in 2010. And that's when we made the decision to get away from PAX. So 2010 was going to be the last year that we actually published PAX, and we moved to a thesaurus. Now, since PAX was actually published every 2 years, we kind of had 2 years to get this done. So the first piece of the project was to do that conversion from PAX to a new thesaurus. And then we went through 2 iterations of development and ultimately ended up with version 1.2 towards the end of 2011. And then, of course, we're going to need to develop web services between AIP and Publishing and Access Innovations so that we can enrich our content. So the second piece of the project was an archival XML conversion. This was a backfile conversion of AIP content along with member society content, and it encompassed 13 societies, 39 journals, and 2 conference proceedings. It's worth noting, from our standpoint, conference proceedings content is a lot like journal content, and so we basically can convert that to the same format as we do our journal articles with a little extra metadata, conference metadata. And the decision, of course, was to go to the journal archiving interchange tag suite version 1.0. So what we had to convert was 140,000 full-text XML records. This really was our best content. It was our content from 2003 forward. And what made it great was not only that it was XML with MathML and all that great stuff, but back in 2003 is when we actually started using the XML to drive our composition. We also had 100,000 full-text SGML records. This content was basically from about 1996 to 2003. Wasn't as good because it was SGML, but more to the point, it was created off the back end of the composition process. So very dirty data. Worked well on the platform, but there was a lot of hoops we had to jump through to get it to work well. We also had about 600,000 heads and tails in a different SGML format. And it's worth noting also that for any full-text XML or SGML record, we also had that heads and tails format, which you might know as SPIN, Searchable Physics Information Notices. So with any good project, if you can descope, it's a good idea. And we made the decision that this was a lot of content to convert. We already knew that we were going to have to do a full-text XML and a heads and tails SGML conversion. So the first thing we decided was we weren't going to convert the full-text SGML. Instead, that would go into the archive, and we could defer that to later if everything went so well that we had plenty of time on the project to address that conversion. So in the end, what we ended up with was 140,000 full-text XML records to convert and about 670,000 SPIN SGML records to convert.
Matt, you said this, I think, but the full-text SGML was all old stuff, right? Did you give the years?
It was started about 1996 to 2003, roughly speaking.
So we're not old. Okay, thank you.
So the timelines start overlapping a little bit. You can see that in the middle of 2011, we start taking a look at the JATS format so we could understand what our usage was going to be, what the proper usage should be. We started developing programs and testing those out. And then into about the middle of 2012, we thought we were in a pretty good position to start converting the content. And then we started converting the whole back file content, which took quite a long time. Not so much the time it takes to process, but all the time it takes to reprocess, because we kind of relived all the sins of the years, differences in content. So that was kind of a fun time. But what was really interesting is you can see that we were doing all this development well ahead of JATS being released in around Q3 of 2012. So that was kind of interesting too, because we actually had a pipeline into the JATS working group, and we were able to not only get some good information back about usage, but also we kind of pushed that development a little bit as well. So what did we end up with? We ended up enriching our full-text XML in ways that I think everybody here is very familiar with. There'd be a section of the top 10 terms. We assign an ID to it. In this case, we're only showing one term, keyword 1.1. The term is actually 2-6 semiconductors. It's got a weight assigned to it, and it can be referenced through the inline tagging via the ID or ID combination keyword 1.1. And again, no surprise to anybody in this room that the text that was tagged doesn't actually match the term. So, you know, what I'm not showing there obviously is the other 9 terms. But that's how the full text gets enriched. And the next piece of the puzzle is, of course, the author and affiliation disambiguation. So basically taking this entire corpus of about 800,000 now JATS XML records, we can send them through the AI engines and start creating author and affiliation records. Again, derived from JATS, based on things that we've heard all week. We're matching names and matching email addresses, looking at common co-authors, affiliations, and to me the most exciting thing there was looking at thesaurus terms that match across different publications. So basically using subject matter as a way to find out that John Smith that published in astronomy isn't the John Smith that published in lasers. So a couple of slides on the author records. We start obviously with a unique ID. We can see his preferred name and then an alternate name where obviously Michael C. matches up with MC Tarrant. We then get a list of their publications. Obviously the DOI is important in any XML schema that you have. But the next piece is actually very interesting to me. It's the contributor sequence. This matches up with the sequence of the author in the byline in the XML. And what's really cool about that isn't necessarily that it matches up with the XML that it was derived from, but more importantly, we have similar data in our peer review system. So now we're starting to think about how this data might link to other systems. We also have the affiliation ID for this particular article, and again, this is the disambiguated affiliation, and the list of subjects from that article. Probably a bad example because there was one keyword I selected in the erratum. We then get a list, again, we're in the specific publication section of the XML. So these are all the co-authors, again, with their disambiguated affiliate author ID. And again, these are the authors from that particular publication. If there were more publications, you'd see further sections. Then when we get to the bottom of the record, here's the really cool part, which is the keywords that are associated with that author. So now we're taking a look at all the keywords across all the publications and learning a little bit more about this author. He might have, this may tease out his particular area of expertise, and now we can use that for various purposes. The affiliation records. Again, obviously a unique ID that's linked across the author records. You can see we have an institution name, 2 separate departments, so maybe these were found because the postal code matched up. Maybe it was just because it was University of California, Berkeley. But again, we can see the various places where he's published. And then basically a list of all of the articles that were published for that affiliation. So use cases. Obviously, the reason that we did all this was for platform features. That was the driving force over the past couple of years, and certainly Rebecca's going to show you a lot about that in a couple of minutes. Since then, we've also used it for targeted marketing campaigns. So we can get a list of authors, and basically we've linked across to our peer review system to get email addresses, and we can set up some targeted marketing campaigns. We're also looking at it for business intelligence. Again, this is more of a future, but we're starting to look at bringing data from disparate systems together. I kind of hesitate to use the word big data because I don't think that we're quite up in that sphere. But we are talking about pulling in data from peer review, pulling in usage data, bringing in data from our fulfillment system, and seeing how we can link those things together. So we think that the combination of the semantic enrichment and the fact that we have this stuff marked up in XML is going to help us do that. The next big thing, we don't know what it is, but certainly some of the things I've seen this week, the work that PLOS is doing is real exciting. And we've talked about a lot of that stuff, but we certainly haven't gotten to that level as yet. So another timeline, you can see that obviously we couldn't start doing the semantic enrichment until we had the web services developed and we started converting some of the content, so that stretched into 2013. Now that we had all these wonderful components, we actually had to glue it all together. And in the spirit of things brand new, we decided to bring in a brand new content management system. And what we selected was our suite, which is from Really Strategies. If you're not familiar with R Suite, it's a content management system that, as its foundation, uses MarkLogic. And we thought this was a perfect fit for us because we could bring in our XML, we could start working with it in terms of link data, and we're really excited about hopefully pushing that forward. I think the talk that Kevin gave yesterday was fantastic and really pointed out a lot of the areas that we want to go to. In the meantime, we actually had to build all the connectors between our systems and Access Innovations through web services, and as well as building in the programs that we're going to disseminate out to Pub2Web and communicate back and forth certain statuses. Quick shout out to the Access Innovations people. We basically send our XML to them in real time through a web service, and it gets enriched. And when we first started doing that, we were absolutely shocked at how quickly the records came back. If I went and took like a 75K, 100K article, and I sent it through to Access Innovations right now, I'd probably have the content back enriched right about now. And so it really was impressive how well that system works for us. So the workflow we ended up with a little typical swim lane looking diagram. We have Access Innovations at the top, AIP Publishing in the middle, and Pub2Web at the bottom. So it starts when we start receiving our online ready content, the full text XML, PDF, figure, supplemental material, and we basically ingest that into our R Suite system. Now logically, we split our R Suite system into a production component and an archive component. So the production component really is transient data, archive component stays there forever. So the first thing that happens is when the content hits R Suite, automated workflows kick off and they start hitting those web services at Access Innovations to semantically enrich the full text XML. That comes back into our system and is automatically trafficked down to Pub2Web into their pending area. That's actually done through FTP, and there is some messaging that goes back and forth to let us know that it's made it there successfully or not. We actually have our staff gets onto the Pub2Web pending area and does a QC of the article. Once it's approved, it gets pushed over to online. And again, this diagram isn't trying to show you all the crazy correction cycles, but certainly that's built in as well. Once the article goes to Pub2Web and it's online, we get messages back from Pub2Web to that effect that are trafficked into our Suite production. That then moves the article over from the production area into the archive, and that actually kicks off a whole content delivery system that I won't go into today. What also happened at the point that we set the article up for semantic enrichment, number 7, which maybe would be better suited as 3A, is that kicks off the author and affiliation disambiguation processes. So Access Innovation starts either creating new records, augmenting records. We might get some delete records if we find that there's been a match and we can kind of collapse a record. Those records come back to the R Suite archive and are trafficked straight over to Pub2Web online. I think that Rebecca will show you some of that. So, the automated workflow timeline, that started in 2011 when we got the product in. There was quite a long period where we basically got R Suite in and we were playing with it for about 6 months just to get a better feel for what the product could do for us and how we wanted to use it. There's a period of time where we were doing our content modeling, so we knew how we wanted to put the data into the system. That included understanding that we wanted to create a production area and an archive area, and how that data would sit in the repository. Of course, we had to develop all the programs for the slide from previously, and then we started loading the back file into R Suite. Once we got to that point, we could then intercept our production processes and start in real time pumping our content into R Suite and out to Pub2Web. And that actually happened prior to going to live. So the last timeline slide I have here shows the platform development, which we did a vendor selection, some project kicked off, a couple of beta periods, and then finally the launch party towards the end of 2013. And what I always think is interesting about this project is when we start looking at some of the timelines, the Beta 1 period was around Q1 2012, and we had just started finishing up the conversion programs. We were in the middle of some content modeling for R Suite. Semantic enrichment processing hadn't started. So all these things were kind of swirling around at once, and it was quite a task to try to push forward and coordinate. And that basically is how we got to where we are now. And I'll introduce Rebecca and let her show you all the cool features.